So I'm going to plunge straight in so we can get through as many questions as possible and hopefully take a few from the audience as well. And I want to start, I guess, with a question about NATO for all of you. Ambassador Tuts, you know, last I read, there was still some question up in the air about whether or not NATO defense ministers were going to be talking about measures to support Greenland security at their meeting on Thursday. And I'm wondering if there is anything you can tell us about the status of talks or sort of the broader future framework that is being discussed around Greenland, Transarctic security, bearing in mind, of course, obviously you're representing the EU, not NATO, but there is significant overlap.
No, I think, thank you very much for this interesting first question. I think it's important to recall because sometimes people are not all aware that the EU itself is not a member of NATO, but we have 23 out of 27 EU member states members of NATO. And in that spirit, of course, having now, in addition to the other, we had Finland and Sweden acceding recently to NATO, we are working together with NATO in a very complementary way. I have to say that we support NATO, we complement NATO, and of course we have to think about how we could assume more responsibility for our defense in Europe. But NATO remains the cornerstone of our security in Europe. It's very clear. Maybe coming back to your point on Greenland, you have noticed that the EU has been very united on that point. We have unequivocally and immediately recalled the importance of respect for international law, territorial integrity, sovereignty, and that it is for Greenlanders and Danes to decide about their future. So this was immediate, united, and the EU has been able to show a very strong position on this question. Now, for the future discussion, I would like to say that the EU has no intention to, of course, to replace NATO or to build a parallel architecture to NATO. This is not the point at all. So just to come back to my first point, complementarity is key. And we have a collective responsibility for a secure Arctic, because this is the topic of today.
Ambassador Bellman, my understanding is that the core of what's being discussed is around vigilance. It's around Arctic Sentry, as Senator Murkowski mentioned. What is your understanding of what Arctic Sentry is, how it will work? What do we all need to understand about it?
Thanks, Danielle, and thanks for having me here. Before answering your question, allow me to convey the most heartfelt condolences from the German government and the German people with regard to the terrible shooting in British Columbia yesterday. The Chancellor has made a statement in this regard this morning, and as a mother of 3 school children, you know, we have had these shootings in Germany as well. We know how hard it is to heal, and our thoughts are with the families and friends and with the community. In terms of your questions, when we put the ideas forward in NATO at the beginning of the year from the German side to set up a mission like this, what we had in mind is to, you know, we have a Baltic Sentry enhanced vigilance activity in the Baltic Sea, where we monitor Russian sabotage operations, the Shadow Fleet, and all of that through enhanced presences, both via vessels, but also from the air, surveillance instruments and airplanes that do that kind of work, etc. So when the debate around Greenland became as disruptive as it was, we tried to put ideas on the table in NATO because we believe that's the organization that should take care of that, how to enhance security presence in the Arctic and to be helpful in order to try create a channel to address any possible security or defense gap that might be there. Defense ministers will meet tomorrow in Brussels, and I'm confident there will be an announcement in this regard, and I can tell you from the German government that we will contribute substantially to this activity, and I'm really glad that we managed to get the process is, running very quickly in order to come to this point.
Ambassador Merrier, the French perspective on NATO's involvement, Europe's involvement in the Arctic, and how you see it evolving, I guess, with Greenland kind of precipitating it.
Thank you very much for that. I mean, you were expecting the French to say something nasty about NATO. I mean, you failed. You failed because, I mean, I would say, we see this is still the North Atlantic. And a lot of our interest for the security of the Arctic lies in the fact that it's one of the corridors for strategic and attack Soviet submarines to Russian submarines, I should say. I mean, to go and to patrol around Europe. I mean, this is one of the most strategic assets, and we have to deal with. And I would say that 10 years ago, when I was trying to discuss as the director for strategic affairs of the French Ministry of Defense, with my Canadian partners, I mean, the question on Arctic was, how dare you to ask that question? I see that now things have changed dramatically, and I think it's the right thing even for all NATO members. I see that we have a deep interest because the presence of NATO, these operations, but also the involvement of the EU is in the interest of Canada now, because in a sense, it's a demultiplier of sovereignty. I mean, Canada is there with the major European countries who are there, who respect the rule of law. As the U.S. Senator just mentioned it, we also open a consulate. Because we have a few scores of French citizens research working with Canadian research laboratories, and we have an interest for Greenland for decades. I would remember that the first dictionary of Inuit language was written by a French priest in the mid-50s, and is still used, by the way. So, Greenland is not, terra incognita for the French. We are there around. We have been maintaining our presence, our subs, our Navy. We are working very closely with Canada on this, and we intend to do more because, Arctic is certainly, the security for Canada, but it's also a matter of deep interest for the Europeans.
Ambassador Tinline, Britain's perspective on what Arctic vigilance looks like. Is it ships? Is it troops? Is it a role in the Golden Dome, whatever that ends up looking like?
Yeah, so, sorry, let me join my colleagues in our condolences to the people of British Columbia and all Canadians. Clearly, the news overnight has been horrendous, and our thoughts are with all of those affected. So, as you looked towards the north, we've worried for a long time about the ship routes, as Michel mentions, into the North Atlantic, through the seas between the UK, Iceland, and Greenland. We've long had Royal Marines training in the High North in Norway, and just this month we've had one of the biggest exercises for years with Royal Marines deployed with Norwegian and other NATO colleagues. In 2014, obviously before Sweden and Finland joined NATO, we formed the Joint Expeditionary Force to try and bring together the Nordic countries, the Baltic countries, and the UK to think about how we could work more effectively to secure the North from the threats we see in the North. So this is something that isn't wholly new. Clearly, the concern with what Russia has been doing recently, especially with, we're nearly at the 4th anniversary of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, especially with the recent step up in threats from Russia. Of course, there is a greater priority on it, and as it becomes easier to traverse the Arctic as the climate changes, absolutely right, we should step up and do more. I think what you've seen, as I say, over decades in terms of, at sea, on land, joint training, the alliance working together, and as I say, before Sweden and Finland joined, even beyond the NATO alliance. It's a really important effort. It's a really important area of the NATO countries that we need to absolutely make sure that we're stepping up to secure.
It was interesting because I think historically Canada and Europe's approaches to how NATO should act in the Arctic have been quite different. And I found it very interesting to hear Minister Anand saying that she believes that NATO must reach north and not just east. Ambassador Tinline, staying with you, like, are we seeing more? Do we have alignment now on that?
So obviously we can't stop looking east, right? What is happening in Ukraine is horrendous, and we must continue that support to the people of Ukraine as they continue that fight. And we need to continue the wider work in the Baltics and in the wider securing kind of the eastern part of NATO. Absolutely. So we can't shift away from doing that, but absolutely, I think there is a recognition that we need to do more in the north to respond to those threats that we're seeing through the north. As I say, it isn't entirely new. We've been very present in elements of that northern defence for some time, but absolutely we need to step it up. And I think there's a great sort of sense across the alliance that we will do so.
I was unaware, but I was told this week that in fact Canada has never had a NATO representative because our representation is always done through NORAD, and normally then it's an American, I think. Is that true?
Well, there's certainly a Canadian delegation
Yes.
to NATO at NATO
Yeah,
headquarters.
yes.
I don't know the exact sort of position of the Canadian military within NATO, but there's definitely a Canadian delegation to NATO and Canadian officers in the NATO
Yes,
staff.
but I know some of them.
At the military committee also, and Canada is represented in Norfolk at the JCS. So I mean, this is not it's not a real question.
I'll rephrase the question. I sort of asked the same question to Ambassador Murkowski, but maybe the question is how you see NORAD and NATO interacting, because I think what we saw in Greenland recently suggested that, you know, some of the protocols may not be designed to handle the kind of challenges that we've been seeing of late. And I'm wondering how that gets untangled. In a worst case scenario, I mean, if we're being very blunt, you could have a situation in which you have Canada and the US in NORAD and Canada also in NATO, and NATO and NORAD taking different positions on Greenland. Ambassador Bellman.
So maybe just to bring a bit of more clarity into the confusion. So of course, Canada and the US are full members of NATO. You have a great NATO ambassador, Canadian ambassador at NATO, Heidi Hewlin, who's doing an excellent job. The problem is with the area of responsibility of the SACEUR, which is the highest NATO commander. So in terms of US command structure, your territorial defense and your Arctic is under NORAD and the command structures in that regard, whereas the European defense is under the SACEUR, who's also the highest US commander for Europe, the US EUCOM. And that means that in terms of the defense planning, the architecture, and the territory that the highest NATO commander can oversee, your Arctic isn't part of that because that's done bilaterally with the US. And the minister spoke to this in the regard that, for example, in terms of capability targets that Canada has to fulfill for NATO, that's for European defense. And what Canada wants now, and we understand that, is to have a greater recognition in that process of the very substantial investments you have to do in your Arctic. So there is some work to do around aligning the defense planning. There's some work to do of sorting out how that can be done in a better way. And we will see exactly once the enhanced vigilance activity is announced tomorrow. You know, it will be more public of what that will look like. I just want to echo what Rob has said in the sense that we've been offering for some time to do more inside NATO in the Arctic. For, you know, it was, we've always respected there is an Arctic lead around this, so it's the Arctic NATO allies that have to decide how much of that they want. I think in the past there was more reluctance of seeing more in NATO, quite frankly, and I've said on this very stage last year, making the same offer and saying, we and other allies in NATO, we have capabilities we can bring to bear. We are there if you want us to do more, but we are in your hands and under your lead on whether you want that or not. And I think that is what has, and your question alluded to that, that is what has changed now, that in addition to the European Arctic allies, for whom it is very natural that NATO covers Arctic because the European Arctic is part of the setup and the defense planning, that on the Canadian side also now there is a greater readiness and even a push for more NATO in the Arctic.
Thank you for clarifying. Is there anything either of you would like to add to that sort of changing alignment and relationship between NORAD and NATO ambassador?
I would say it's a unique opportunity for the NATO bureaucracy to move and to move quickly. You see what I mean? Those are what our German colleague just explained is proof that, I mean, there's a need to modify the architecture, but I'm sure we will find the ways and means to do it. Once again, I mean, what NATO wants to do is a kind of reassurance for Canada in its own also, and also in the interest of NATO nations. I mean, our main target, and I think that the Alaska senator just put it bluntly, but I mean, the real threat now for the next, and since the early 2000s, is far more Russia than China. That may change in the future, because with the northern route, the will of the Chinese to enlarge the pressure of the US subs in the South China Sea, I mean, for them, the only solution is to develop a new theater. And this new theater, with the help of Russia, would be to bring more black ships in the north in order to counter and to force NATO and the US Navy to put more subs in order to counter this presence. We are not at that stage. That may be the issue, especially with climate change, the fact that the northern route will be easier to navigate, which is not the case for the moment. But you know, it's so easy to put subs below a cargo or a container ship, you know, in order to transfer that. That's the threat for most probably in the next 5 or 7 years. But this is it. So I mean, for us, I mean, if this exercise, we have an effort of reassurance, develop maritime patrol crafts, aerial surveillance, space surveillance. I mean, how we use long-range drones in order to catch the information. You know, you don't need anymore to have a lot of troops on the ground. You know, this is the main learnings we may find from this present crisis.
Ambassador Tuts, I'm interested in your thoughts on the China-Russia threat. You know, this President Trump talking about Chinese and Russians being all over Greenland was just the latest, but there have been concerns about joint flights off the coast of Alaska. Many countries' Arctic strategies, including those of Canada and the US, talk about the China-Russia threat sort of in tandem. Has the China threat been overstated? Will it be restated in some way in the next EU Arctic strategy, whenever that comes out? I think the last one was in 2021.
Yes, thank you. But I think that the previous speaker, she gave an interesting answer to this question already. And we know that experts concur to admit that there is no immediate military threat from China and Russia in the Arctic now. This is
No imminent threat.
There is no imminent military threat.
Right.
Because, of course, we are concerned by, I would say, the more assertive behaviors or hybrid activities from China and Russia. And we have seen recently that Russia has reopened some military bases in the Arctic. So there are some concerns. So as you mentioned, we are revisiting, we are having a fresh look on our Arctic policy dating from 2021, and security, of course, is a very important angle, but not just that. And I would say that there is more to security than just hard security. So we should not see security with the military lens alone. So there is a lot to say. And I would like to echo what Minister Anand said at the beginning, the link between security, economy, security, prosperity. So what we intend to do in our new strategy is to have, as we had in the previous one, a comprehensive approach, meaning that we need to think about the economy, connectivity, renewable energy, a lot of topics on which we can work together to improve prosperity, because we want stability, security, safe Arctic, but a prosperous Arctic. So what does it mean concretely? That, just to give you an example, in this new Arctic policy, and I'm very happy to see that Claude Véron-Reville, our EU Special Envoy for Arctic Policy, is with us today, and she will intervene tomorrow, so she will give you more detail. But we are considering to work on critical raw material, energy, resource, but also education, youth. We are doing a lot on youth. The EU is funding youth program to enhance and to have some youth dialogue. So all this has to be done in close cooperation with local community, with indigenous community, in the spirit of the UN Declaration on the Right of Indigenous People. This is a very important point for us, this comprehensive approach and human-centric approach as well. Security, yes, but just not with the military angle.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about some of those business opportunities, science opportunities as well in a second. But just to close the circle on the China-Russia question, Ambassador Bellman, I wanted to get your thoughts, and also Rob Tinline's on the same.
I would maybe nuance it a bit differently. So from a NATO perspective, Russia is the most direct threat to NATO, and that includes the Arctic. So we have seen a significant military buildup for years. It has to do with the fact that the ice is melting and Russia has to defend, or has to sort of ramp up the defense along their northern coast, previewing that. But the degree to which there is military activity up in the north is definitely concerning. We see at the same time that they have broken or cancelled or undermined every single arms control or disarmament treaty that existed. We see how references to the Arctic Council disappear. We see significant activity that feeds into the shadow fleet, et cetera, et cetera. So I would be under absolutely no illusion that Russia is preparing and aiming for conflict with NATO beyond what we see currently with the war that is still going on in Ukraine. Russian military is at 1.5 million men under arms. The tendency goes up. The society is prepared for a war economy, and none of that is going to change, and it's not going to change even if there were to be peace in Ukraine, which we all hope for this year. So, so we as NATO, and that includes the European piece, but it includes the North American piece, and the investments, the very significant investments that have to be done here in the Canadian Arctic. We have to do absolutely everything to ensure that our deterrence holds and that Russia understands that we are absolutely serious in defending every inch of NATO territory. If our deterrence fails and there is a conflict between NATO and Russia in the years to come, which we of course all hope will not be the case, there shouldn't be any illusion that this will be a conflict of 360 degrees, and it will play in every theater. We take that threat very, very seriously, which is one element why we built our submarines together with an Arctic nation, Norway. Because for us, these theaters are linked. The North Sea, the North Atlantic, the Arctic theater, and Michel spoke to that, all of that in the end, in terms of how the Russians operate, is linked. China is different. I would be very vigilant as to Chinese ambitions, ambitions in terms of raw materials, but just look at the Chinese icebreaker fleet and you know where this is headed and what the ambition is. So it's not the same quality in terms of a direct military threat at the moment, but also there, I think eyes wide open and no illusions as to what the ambition is, and the Chinese military build-up overall is breathtaking, and it takes place at high speed, I would say.
Everything you've just said, Canada obviously has a submarine decision to make. Would that suggest that the German-Norway bid might make more sense in the context of everything that you've just said compared to the South Korea sub?
Well, it's a Canadian decision,
Question.
so I mean, I can tell you how we see it. It's a Canadian decision. We will respect whatever decision Canada takes. I think the difference between the two is we don't want a customer-producer relationship. We want a partnership between three nations that share a defense treaty and a promise that an attack on one is an attack on all. So 3 NATO allies, 2 of them would be Arctic nations, and our approach is to build a common supply chain, build the industry here over time, have interchangeable crews, and build the biggest conventional submarine fleet around the same model, which will be the most modern conventional submarine on the market in the next years to come on the globe. So we believe it makes a lot of sense. It speaks to the Prime Minister's middle powers joining ranks in terms of capability. This is, I think, the most consequential decision in terms of how you translate that into action that Canada has to take this year.
All right. Ambassador Tinline, China, Russia, your thoughts?
So look, I'd agree with much of that. So last week I was in Winnipeg, and I sort of sat down with the commander of the 1st Canadian Air Division, which sort of is an integral part of NORAD and the North American response. And it's an incredibly impressive integrated system that Canada and the US have built together. And a lot of what the priority of that is seeing things coming. And so the thing I'd add to what colleagues have said is a lot of this is about making sure we can see threats and innovating to make sure that we've got that visibility of what might come. And obviously part of that is NORAD, but it goes far beyond NORAD in terms of really understanding what we're dealing with in the north, and then obviously having the capabilities to do it. And if you look at our strategic defense review, which came out a little less than a year ago, a large part of what our focus in that was about how do we build in innovation into what we do in UK defence, so that if you see the speed at which the Ukrainians have had to innovate in order to respond, how can we build some of that innovation into how we operate, whether that's in armaments, but also whether that's in sensors, and being able to kind of have the visibility and reach into areas where traditionally we may have had less. And I think that is a key part of how we defend ourselves, as well as the sort of the pointier edge of defense.
I'm going to move the conversation on beyond security, and I'd like to talk a little bit about science, and particularly climate science. There are other consequences from this escalation in Arctic tension that we are seeing. Greenland would be a case in point. Last month, I wrote a story about the ways that US scientists are already seeing a chill on collaborative research projects in Greenland. We have already lost scientific data out of Russia since the invasion of Ukraine. Maybe this is a question for you, Ambassador Tuts. To what extent is Europe prepared to maybe fill some of these gaps, and what is being done diplomatically to make sure that as tensions in the region escalate, the very reason that it is opening up, which is anthropogenic climate change, is not being ignored, and that research continues?
Yes, maybe I should start by recalling what we do with our research and innovation financial program. So you probably heard about Horizon Europe or Horizon 2020. These are financial tools, so financed by the EU budget, where we are investing in Arctic research. And since, I think, 2014, with Horizon 20, with Horizon Europe, we have invested more than 474 million euro in research in relation with Arctic. It might be permafrost or shipping risk or clean energy. So there is a lot. So that means that we are a major, the EU is a major actor in Arctic research. This might not be enough, but you know that the EU will soon adopt a new multi-financial program for the next 7 years, and the Commission has currently tabled a proposal to double this research program. And this was a recommendation made by Mario Draghi, the former ECB president, European Central Bank president, who prepared a year ago a report on competitiveness, the Europe competitiveness. And one of his recommendations was to increase our financing tool for research and innovation. So in that respect and in this context, we are elaborating a research program concerning the Arctic, and we will do more. So this is on the agenda. Is it enough to fill the gap? That's another question. But we are already, I would say, an important actor in this area.
Does anyone else have anything that they would like to add on the issue of polar research?
Sure. That's right. So, so look, we've got the British Antarctic Survey, obviously, in the south, which does a huge amount of polar research, but in the other pole, with its research station on Antarctica, and the Scott Polar Research Institute in Cambridge drives a lot of that in the UK. So, I mean, essentially, absolutely, we really need to step up the research in the polar regions as they change. I think we're at the heart of that. It's always a collaborative effort when you get into scientific research, but this you see the increasing interest in it, focus on it, because the poles are two of the regions that are changing fastest.
So I think you're absolutely right. Research has changed due to the geopolitical situation. We used to do a lot of research on permafrost soils with Russia. That's all gone for obvious reasons. So we have shifted a lot of our research to Canada, actually, because you're the only other country where you can do that type of research. And there's a big project our Alfred Wegener Institute is doing at the Mackenzie River Delta on how the melting and the climate change affects greenhouse gases coming out of the soils and what this means, etc. Germany is an Arctic research superpower. You find a lot of that in our Arctic strategy from 2 years ago. Our leading research institute, which is the Alfred Wegener Institute, employs 1,000 people. We have an icebreaker research vessel, the Polarstern 1, which did the biggest ever Arctic expedition, the Mosaic expedition, a couple of years back. And you know, science is still writing out the data and writing up the reports on the data that was taken. We've decided to build a new one, so we will invest 2 billion Canadian dollars in the next icebreaker research vessel to ensure that we keep that capability. We have a lot of planes and other instruments for Arctic research. We have the radar here in Inuvik and other projects, a lot of EU projects also in Canada that usually our institutions coordinate because they are so well established on the research market. And it's really important for our researchers as well as for our defense to cooperate with indigenous communities and local communities while doing this, because they are the knowledge holders and we benefit in both ways. from these relations and cooperation that we've built over many years, and hope to continue to do so.
Ambassador Mireille.
I would say, you know, how the French are modest, you know, I mean, they modest are the French, so I mean, you don't put that on the T-shirt, but I mean, the interest for, I mean, research in the Arctic as well as in the Antarctic has been certainly one of the matter of interest for the state research. And you know, for years we are working with the Université Laval of Quebec on the Tjorven international program. We have poured, I mean, millions of euros in this research. I mean, we are also developing, I mean, with the EU on the Horizon project, but I mean, some satellites projects measure the thickness of ice, you know, and I think it's, I mean, definitely the consequences, the result of that is that we will continue to augment our cooperation and research, looking at the impact of climate change. I mean, that's a booster for the development of those issues. But on the other hand, we launch, I mean, very modestly, but and it's not a joke, I mean, some research in putting, I mean, the autochtones, you know, using the whole recipes of the autochtones just to try to adapt them to, I mean, some research. And with some incredible results. For example, we have a program where we were looking at the level of the number of animals, you know, and thanks to those, I should say, recipes, you know, I mean, elements put forward by the stories, by tribes there. I mean, we have been able to improve some measurements, you know, for the future. So, I mean, it's very modest, but it says that, I mean, all those research were made in full respect of the indigenous copyright, you see, in order to bring them, and the intention is to continue to bring them to some French universities to develop those projects. So, I mean, for the future, I mean, I think that there will be a lot to be done with the help of the European Union and those huge budgets that are now open to Canada. And one of the biggest problem we have is how to plug the Canadian university to, I mean, the can I say that, to the technostructure of Brussels.
Can I
Yeah,
say
please.
maybe a few words about that? So, Michel, thank you for that, of course. Horizon now is accessible to Canadian researchers, SMEs as well. So since July 2024, we have signed an agreement with Canada, and Canada has access to this funding for research. So there's another possibility to cooperate a lot between universities, researchers in Europe and in Canada. And our role as a delegation here, an embassy, if you want, a delegation in Canada, is to explain to universities. So we have organized some roadshows, some seminars, some webinar to explain how to navigate in this sometimes a bit burdensome process to apply for funding. So we are working on that. This is important because it has to be known, first of all, that this is possible and how to navigate. We are working on it.
I want to leave about 10 minutes for questions, but maybe we can very quickly talk about some of the economic opportunities as well that are occurring as the North opens up. Obviously, a lot of those are around dual-use infrastructure associated with the security threats, but there is just a need, certainly in Canada's Arctic, for infrastructure in general. Ambassador Tuts, do you want to talk about what you find most interesting or exciting right now?
Yeah, thank you. 3 points very quickly. First, critical raw material. And we have developed with Canada a strategic partnership on critical raw material.
Yeah.
We will have in Toronto in a few weeks the 8th meeting between the EU and Canada, and it works, meaning that we have now B2B contact and we are enhancing our operation. You know that just to give you an example, Canada has most of the critical raw material the EU needs, so we need to enhance this cooperation. Second point, energy. This is absolutely essential. Green energy, hydrogen, and we have developed some bilateral projects from time to time, but we need to have an EU angle as well. And the last one is digital and connectivity. Connectivity, we might work on subsea cables that could help to enhance the connectivity between Europe and Japan. But by the way, we could also give more access to remote areas in the Arctic. So enhance and improving connectivity in these remote areas. So these are the 3 points I see for further development immediately.
The last one is quite interesting because I think there are plans in Canada as well to build a fiber cable as well, which, so how would you envisage sort of running an underwater cable to get a true Transarctic experience? I guess you'd have to run it under the Northwest Passage. Is that something you would do with Canada, or how would it work?
I can tell you that there was a first conversation on that topic between Minister Solomon and our Executive Vice President Virkkunen in Montreal a few weeks ago on the margin of the G7. So the conversation has started. So there is a joint interest in trying to see what we can do together.
But I think that, this is a famous Far North Fiber program. And I think this is a huge thing. It's a huge thing because connectivity is the problem of Arctic. How can we develop redundancies? How can we give to these populations totally isolated, the ways and means, to communicate with the world? And this is one thing that could transform the whole Arctic. To my knowledge, the program is to go from Japan to Europe, to Finland, to Sweden, to Norway, to reach the north in order to give huge capacities. But there's another aspect. The question is redundancy, with satellite communications. Canada is trying to develop its own, can I say that, its own...
Circumpolar?
Yes, with Telsat, for example, but this is for the future, maybe for the near future, but it's not there. Just want to remind you that Eutelsat already is able to cover the whole Arctic and with the OneWeb galaxy. And this is something on which we need to work in order not to compete. It will not replace a 100% Canadian galaxy of satellites, but there's nothing more important than redundancy in those spaces. So, we see a lot of interest. Eutelsat is ready, to invest there, and has already stations, in the Arctic. So, it's not a newcomer in the region, and it may have a lot of interest for civilian purposes as well as for the military. And there's a third thing. You mentioned, my dear colleague mentioned hydrogen. Okay, green hydrogen, wonderful. But I think that the near future is the real thing is how can we build micro-reactors for those communities? And the nuclear energy is most probably one of the topics to look at, not the SMRs. For the moment, the SMRs are big things.
Yeah.
But to which extent, the value chains, most of the producers of small reactors may find, a way forward in order to help those communities. That's going to be, one of the challenges of the next decade.
Yeah, and certainly small modular nuclear reactors, very topical here in Canada as well. Britain's Defence Minister, John Healey, has said he would like to see sources of private capital that haven't been considered defense before. And so, question to you, Ambassador, on that, what that looks like, what kind of private investment we're seeing. I don't know whether would that be geared towards dual use kind of things, or?
So, that's clearly not specific to the Arctic. That's a broad statement about defence. So, look, just one thing, picking up on critical minerals. One way that we're trying to unlock the the investment in critical minerals is our export credit organisation is all, normally it's you have to have British content as an export if you want to get government backing for your finance. We've turned that around for critical minerals and said that if the production is going into the British market, then you can get UK government financial backing. So it's one way of trying to kind of make projects around critical minerals more viable and put government support behind them. But look, going in, putting more capital behind defence, as I say, our strategic defence review came out a little less than a year ago. One of the big pushes in that is to say you need industry to step up. You know, if we're all going to spend more on defence, and we're all going to want to buy more, and we're going to want it to be more innovative, that needs the defence industry to kind of meet the governments as we do that. And to do that, we're going to need to suck in new investment, new ideas, new capital, new companies. And so a really kind of core part of our defence review is how do you build the collective industrial base across NATO. Obviously, we have a particular interest in the British industrial base. Everybody has their own interests. Canada has its strong interest in it. But how do we build that industrial base so that it can deliver what we need without, you know, building 32 different types of tank in NATO? It needs to work for all countries, but it also needs to be able to deliver the capabilities that our militaries need, and that will need to suck in more capital and more investment.
I've taken us a little bit over time because I was trying to save 10 minutes for questions. We're at about 8.5 right now, so maybe we'll pivot to that. Is there anyone in the audience that has a question for any of our ambassadors? Yeah, we have one over here.
I can project as well. Bonjour. Test. Bonjour, mesdames, messieurs, les ambassadeurs, Général Parent. So thank you for being here, and thank you for the alliance that you have with Canada. Very interesting conversation this morning. My question to you is, we spoke of your individual or the EU Arctic strategy. Just saw the Italian Arctic strategy that was published not too long ago. Pour la France, has there or will there be a shift? We spoke a lot of the M and the dime, diplomatic, information, military, and economic today. Is there a shift in the current or the future Arctic strategy for the EU, moving away from the Arctic exceptionalism and realizing, acknowledging the real threats in 2026, and moving away maybe from the exceptionalism of la recherche aux Svalbard pour la France et autres pays? Merci beaucoup.
I think that's a question for the two of you, really.
Yeah. You should have no doubt. I mean, we are focusing on the Russian threat on the Arctic since the end of the 90s, just because we, as a P5 and as a nuclear power, I mean, we are directly interested in the protection of our strategic subs. They are not in the Pacific. And that's why we have been looking with the utmost interest in the growing presence of the Russian subs, attack submarines, in the North Atlantic and the Great North, or I would say in the European Arctic. But I mean, this is something which has been at the core of our strategic defense. I mean, nuclear deterrence is still the cornerstone of our policy. Now, we are just looking at what's going on, and as I told you, I mean, after decades of question marks and speeches saying, I mean, you French, I mean, you're not a member of the Arctic Council, how dare you to have any opinion or any interest? Things are moving, and fortunately as such. And one more time, I mean, I said we have this very strong link with Canada for centuries, and the idea is, by the time being, with this stupid 51st state issue, blah blah. I mean, there's a need to reinforce, And when I said, I mean, the interest of NATO or the EU or the France or the Germany or Norway for the region, it's a demultiplier of sovereignty because we are all we have the same values and we see it. So, I mean, a question of military alliance, I mean, it shouldn't be, and I spend too much time, within NATO, but sometimes, NATO is moving because of its environment, because the environment is moving. So, we have with the situation in the Arctic, a unique opportunity to do different things. It doesn't mean that you have to put 2 aircraft carriers in front of Greenland. Of course not. But how to develop and how to use the means and the assets we have in terms of monitoring, aerial surveillance, maritime patrol aircraft, and to do better than we were used to do in the past. This is the question. So it's in the hands of the military committee in NATO, in the hands of our Scouts, and let's see what will happen on the situation. You know, we have been able, at the request of the Danes, to send 35 special forces from our mountain divisions there. We have been developing some exercise with the Canadians because now, how to use A400M aircrafts, you know, with this very, very cold temperature. We have been sending our subs in the Arctic waters because you need to see how your system are resisting. So, this is the whole approach. You can say that we have also published an Arctic strategy, who says that it's not our main theater of intervention for the moment, but we need to keep it in front of us because nobody knows if the situation will be maintained at this level of conflictuality or if it will be far worse in the decade to come.
All right. Is there another question? Yeah, we have one over here.
Hello, hi. Lyle Fabian from Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. How will, the Arctic 360, agenda take a northern and indigenous consideration on data sovereignty in practice, such as governance, jurisdiction, and security and benefit sharing? Would you support a formal EU and northern pilot in regards to, partnering and to create a secure and protected sovereignty data corridor through, linking through EU research, government networks, and to northern data sets, such as for compute and defined by shared governance frameworks, approved to use case scenarios, for working with indigenous communities throughout, the Northwest Territories?
I'm really glad you asked that question because, Jessica was also earlier talking about we're almost seeing as kind of a gold rush of people towards the Arctic to take advantage of different economic opportunities. And obviously, there is a very real risk amid the security concerns that some of the consultation gets pushed aside. I don't know who would like to take that question. Since it was EU specific, maybe we should start with you.
Maybe I can say a few words about it. So we are currently, as I mentioned, revisiting or revising our Arctic policy. And this is done with a large and wide consultation. We are consulting everyone. The consultation is available online till the 16th of March. And we are consulting indigenous community, local communities. We had a meeting in Ottawa with the 27 EU ambassadors in Ottawa with Virginia Mers, the new ambassador for Arctic. And we discussed the topic. And she was quite pleased to see how the EU integrates this important reality because, as Michel explained, we need to use this expertise that we have in the north. So this is for us so obvious because also we have a EU based on values, and in this value we have the respect for human rights and the right for every communities. As I mentioned at the beginning, this UN declaration is on the top of our priorities, the human right of indigenous people. So this is something consistently we have kept in mind, and it's still the case today, and this is an essential element. And linked to that, of course, the question of connectivity, prosperity, and economy. So it has to be wide and comprehensive. This is how we see things. As I mentioned, human-centric, meaning also taking into account the opinion, and that's why we consult indigenous communities and population.
All right, and we are at time. I want to thank you all very much for making time for us today. Please join me in giving the ambassadors a hand.
Thanks.
Very good.
That's it.